They called him a miracle of the modern age, Jonathan Carter, the self-made millionaire whose glittering success once made every head turn. But what if the polished marble floors beneath his feet were laid by hands doing dirty work he never knew about? One fateful weekend, Jonathan decides to return to the old neighborhood that shaped him, determined to share his prosperity and nostalgia with the people he left behind. What he uncovers there is a secret so staggering it might obliterate everything he's built. Join us on this labyrinthine journey of betrayal, redemption, and shocking revelations that threaten to tear apart one man's gilded reality forever. Jonathan Carter shifted in the back seat of his limousine, absently running a hand over the embroidered initials on the sleeve of his custom suit. He had worked tirelessly to maintain a polished image, an image that declared, "I am Jonathan Carter, and I have arrived." But deep inside, he nursed a peculiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. It had been years since he last visited West Briarwood, the working-class neighborhood where he'd grown up. The moment he left, he promised himself he wouldn't return unless he had something triumphant to show. And here he was. Triumphant indeed. If the measure of success was money, he had plenty. A fortune built through Carter and Finch investments. Or so he believed. Officially, the story was that he started small, flipping modest properties alongside his partner, Leonard Finch, who was a relentless dealmaker with a gift for forging connections. Over time, the pair caught the momentum of a flourishing real estate market, expanding into commercial developments and then branching out into private equity. Their venture soared. Yet, from the moment Jonathan directed his driver to take that final exit into West Briarwood, something inside him trembled. He gazed out the tinted window, seeing the old convenience store, the battered playground, the brick walls where graffiti still announced local heartbreaks and fleeting romances. A swirl of memories flooded back, each one tinged with the weight of the time lost. It was an odd sense of homecoming, a triumphant hero's return, or so he hoped. He envisioned stepping out of the limo to be greeted by old friends, hearing them exclaim how proud they were that he escaped poverty. He wanted to share the success he had reaped, but also, in a small corner of his heart, he yearned for validation and acknowledgement that he did make it out. When the car finally stopped in front of his childhood home, a modest single-story brick house, he found the exterior changed. The yard was better maintained, the windows replaced, the fence painted a crisp white. A neighbor approached, an older woman he recognized as Mrs. Delgado, leaning on a cane, yet still looking spry. "Jonathan Carter, my goodness, you've come back at last," she exclaimed in a wavering voice. He stepped out, hugging her gently. "I'm here for the weekend," he explained, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. "Figured I'd see how the old place was holding up." His voice softened as he inhaled the scent of freshly cut grass and laundry soap from somewhere nearby. It reminded him of simpler times, days when all that mattered was making it through another shift at the corner store or finishing homework on time. He wanted to linger in that nostalgic fragrance a moment longer. "You look well, Mrs. Delgado," he said, giving her hands a tender squeeze. "Time has been good to you, Mrs. Delgado smiled warmly but gave a bittersweet nod. "Time passes, child," she said, "but I'm happy. You've found success." Little did he know that, beyond these homely smiles and comfort, a ferocious storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of his existence. A faint drizzle began to patter on the roof of the limo as Jonathan strolled across the street, greeting other neighbors. Shyly, children peered out from behind screen doors, unsure of who this tall, well-dressed stranger might be. When it dawned on them that he was giving away small tokens, chocolate bars, Plush Bear's excitement replaced apprehension. In truth, he'd come equipped with gifts, ready to play the role of generous benefactor to the community that once nurtured him. It wasn't purely altruistic, if he was honest. Some part of him craved the emotional payoff, the sense of final closure he hoped this trip would provide. He wanted to stand tall before the neighbors who once whispered he would never amount to anything. He wanted to meet his old buddy, Michael Brown Mikey, as everyone called him, who once joked that the only time Jonathan would see big money was if he married into a wealthy family. Mikey had been half joking, half serious back then, but Jonathan remembered the sting of it all the same. Fortunately, Mikey was still around. Not many from their generation had stayed behind. West Briarwood had been battered by economic downturns, factories shutting down, families leaving in search of better prospects. Word had it that Mikey got by doing odd jobs, plumbing repairs, landscaping, sometimes freelance construction. They hadn't spoken in years, but Jonathan managed to track him down thanks to Miss S. Delgado, who had given him an address just a few blocks away. When Jonathan approached the old duplex, the sagging porch steps groaned under his polished shoes. He knocked. A moment later, the door opened, revealing Mikey. He was heavier than Jonathan remembered, with a scruff of a beard and dark circles beneath his eyes, but the spark was still there. His expression flickered with curiosity, then disbelief, and at last joy. "John?" Mikey gasped. "What in the—" Jonathan spread his arms wide, a grin stretching across his face. "Long time, buddy." Mikey laughed with a mixture of surprise and delight, pulling Jonathan in for a forceful hug. He smelled of sawdust and sweat, as if he'd just gotten home from a shift. "What brings you here?" he asked, stepping aside to let Jonathan in. Stepping into the small living room, Jonathan was taken aback by how cramped and dim it was. It didn't matter. The warmth of Mikey's welcome was enough to make the place feel hospitable. A sense of relief flooded him. For all the glitz and glamour he had acquired, it felt grounding to be in a modest home with a friend who knew him before the tailored suits and private jets. "I came to pay my respects to the neighborhood," Jonathan said, settling onto an old couch that squeaked beneath him. He hesitated before adding, "And to you, of course. It's been too long. I wanted to see if things are." He paused, uncertain of how to phrase it without sounding condescending. "Okay here." Mikey shrugged, an easy smile on his face. "It's West Briarwood, man. It's never easy, but we keep going. And you look like you're doing more than okay." Jonathan smiled, a pang of guilt cutting through him. "I've been fortunate," he admitted. "Though I've been thinking recently maybe it's time to give back. Something in me feels like I owe it to this place." Mikey raised an eyebrow. "You want to invest here, or maybe—" "I'm not sure yet," Jonathan said, "but I can do more than just toss a few dollars, right? I can help rebuild." That was the notion swirling in his head. He pictured refurbishing the local playground, perhaps setting up scholarships. If he'd grown up with more opportunities, maybe he could have skipped the heartbreak of scraping by. Mikey clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, man, anything you do for this place is appreciated. Just remember, people here value sincerity. Don't come in wearing a halo. Just be you." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. If only he could have anticipated how swiftly that plan would crumble under the weight of an unimaginable secret waiting to be unraveled. As the days in West Briarwood unfolded, Jonathan slipped into a rhythm of reacquaintance. Each morning he rose early, determined to greet dawn the way he used to, before the corporate boardrooms, before the penthouse views, before the bulletproof investments that had propelled him to millionaire status. He found his old haunt, a small coffee shop run by the Ruiz family, and was instantly recognized by Mrs. Ruiz herself, who insisted on serving him the biggest cinnamon roll she had. The taste brought back vivid memories of skipping breakfast at home to splurge on one treat a week, a reward after a punishing night shift. It felt surreal to have the money to buy the entire shop if he wanted, But that wasn't what he was here for. Word spread quickly about Jonathan Carter's return. Before long, he was approached by the local youth centre, the battered library, and even the small church that once offered him free lunches on Sundays. Most had modest requests: a computer for the library, new uniforms for the youth basketball team, some repairs to the church roof. Jonathan kept nodding and making mental notes to budget everything. Budget? He laughed to himself. I can pay for all of that easily, he said with an air of confidence. But he always ended that thought with a flicker of doubt. Why haven't I done this sooner? That nagging question hovered in the back of his mind. During a walk through the park, a park that used to be a makeshift soccer field of dust and weeds, he ran into a face he recognized but couldn't quite place. The man had a weathered visage, dark hair going grey, and a cane. He wore a faint grin as if amused by Jonathan's presence. Jonathan slowed his steps, trying to recall the man's name. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man asked, his eyes sharp. Jonathan shook his head politely, apologizing. "I'm sorry you look familiar, but they used to call me Enrique," the man said, tapping the cane on the ground. "We never hung out. But I knew your father, Thomas Carter." Mention of his father was like a punch to the gut. Thomas Carter had been a complicated figure, brilliant but also troubled, with a knack for finding opportunities that blurred moral lines. Jonathan's memories of him were scattered. Late nights he didn't come home, arguments about money, and eventually that big blowout that ended with Jonathan and his mother leaving for good. Eventually, Thomas disappeared from Jonathan's life. Rumor had it he died in some shady business affair. But Jonathan had never gotten the full story. "My father," Jonathan repeated softly. "You knew him." Enrique nodded, an unsettling glint in his eye. "Yes, we worked together, in a sense. I was part of his circle until certain truths came to light." An uneasy feeling sank in Jonathan's stomach. "I see. Well, I haven't heard much about him in years. I figured he is gone." Enrique let out a short laugh. "Yes, he's dead, but the money he handled isn't. Some of that might be in your bank accounts right now, Jonathan." Jonathan froze. "What do you mean?" Enrique shrugged, turning away slightly as if the conversation were already drifting from his interest. "I'm simply suggesting that you look deeper into your finances, especially your earliest seed money. Sometimes fortunes are built on more than hustle and good luck." A swirl of confusion and dread overtook Jonathan. The thought that his father could have had any role in his current financial empire baffled him. As far as Jonathan knew, he'd built everything with Leonard Finch, using legitimate funds from small real estate deals. Unless, could it be that somewhere along the line, his father's dirty deals got funneled into Carter and Finch investments? He tried to brush off the conversation, but the man's parting words echoed ominously. "You think you're a good man, Jonathan, but you might want to check the origin of your empire. The truth has a way of surfacing." That night, he couldn't sleep. The first seeds of doubt took root, and he found himself scrolling through old financial statements on his laptop, cross-referencing timelines. It was a shaky start. He had only the man's cryptic hint to go on, but a single line of missing data in the earliest balance sheets might be enough to unravel everything. Little did Jonathan suspect that this was the start of a spiral that would lead him to the darkest corners of his past and unravel the very foundation upon which he'd built his shining future. Jonathan awoke the next morning after a fitful sleep, the sun's rays slicing through the thin motel curtains. He opted to stay in a humble motel rather than a luxury suite, wanting to immerse himself fully in the environment he had once called home. The night before, he'd tried to scour through old records, but exhaustion and dread weighed on him. He realized the records he had on his laptop were mostly summaries, not the raw data from years ago. Without delay, he decided to call his business partner, Leonard Finch. After a few rings, Leonard's voice answered, brisk and businesslike. "Jonathan, I was just about to reach out. How's the trip going?" Interesting, Jonathan replied, pacing the small motel room. I've run into someone who claims that my father had a hand in the initial investments that jump-started Carter and Finch. Something about illegal origins of my wealth, which doesn't make sense. Leonard was silent for a moment before he let out a disarming chuckle. Your father? I thought you'd cut ties with him long before we even met. John, do you realize how absurd that sounds? Jonathan sighed, relief stirring in him at Leonard's calmness. It does sound absurd, but I can't just dismiss it. My father was known for doing questionable stuff. Could it be that? I don't know, he funneled some dirty money into one of our earliest deals. Leonard's tone shifted slightly, though he tried to maintain composure. If he did, we would have caught it in our due diligence. I've got accountants, lawyers. You think they wouldn't notice large sums of illegal cash? Jonathan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Right, you're probably right. I'm just spooked. The man I spoke with seemed so certain. Look, if it helps, I'll have the legal team do a thorough check of our founding capital sources again, Leonard offered. I promise we'll confirm everything is squeaky clean. You just relax and enjoy reconnecting with your old stomping grounds. Jonathan ended the call feeling somewhat reassured, but still uneasy. Leonard's quick willingness to recheck the numbers should have put him at ease, yet a niggling suspicion persisted. Was it truly that simple? Feeling restless, he decided to meet Mikey for lunch at a local diner. The place was vintage, vinyl booths, checkered floors, a jukebox in the corner humming old rock tunes. Over greasy burgers and fries, they reminisced about childhood. In between jokes, Jonathan gathered the nerve to ask, Mikey, did you ever hear anything about my dad's dealings? You know, beyond the rumors. Mikey paused, chewing thoughtfully. People used to say he was involved in some kind of money laundering scheme. But honestly, I never saw proof. I just knew he had connections with some shady folks around here and in the city. That hardly cleared anything up, but it confirmed that Thomas Carter's reputation was far from pristine. Jonathan forced a laugh. Well, maybe it's just gossip. I've never found a single shred of evidence that ties my father's activities to my business. Mikey patted him on the back. Don't let it get to you. You did good, man. You rose above all that. That's what matters. For a moment, Jonathan believed Mikey's words. Yes, I rose above. My success is my own. But as he bit down on the burger, the weight of that single conversation with Enrique returned to gnaw at him. He wondered, what if the seed money wasn't as clean as I thought? He spent the rest of the day drifting through memories, scanning the old library for any record of charitable contributions in his father's name, anything that might hint at his father's financial footprints. He found nothing. Each time he tried to bury the nagging feeling, it resurfaced stronger, bolstered by the echo of Enrique's warning, the truth has a way of surfacing. 2 days into his visit, Jonathan decided to extend his stay. He made polite excuses to the neighbors who expected him only for a weekend, claiming he felt an urge to reconnect more deeply with his roots. Truthfully, he was determined to unearth whatever secret lurked behind Enrique's cryptic hints. The old man had vanished, though, leaving no address or contact. Jonathan asked around, but most people only knew him as that guy with the cane who'd appeared in West Briarwood a few months ago. In the meantime, strange coincidences began piling up. On a cool evening, Jonathan stepped out for a walk and noticed a dark sedan idling at the corner whenever he left the motel. It happened again the next night. He tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was being paranoid, but couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The swirl of suspicion around his father's dealings made him jumpy. He ventured to the local municipal building, rummaging through old property records, hoping to find something about his father's real estate transactions. The clerk, a wiry woman with half-moon glasses, offered him a sympathetic smile as she handed over dusty files. Thomas Carter, you say? Let's see. Last known property under that name was sold off about 15 years ago to an LLC. The LLC name, Riverside Holdings, didn't ring a bell. When Jonathan requested more info, the clerk frowned. Not much in the file. It's an out-of-state registration. You can see the address here somewhere in Delaware. Frustrated but undeterred, Jonathan copied down the details. Could this be the missing piece? He wondered if this LLC somehow fed money into Carter and Finch in the early days. As he left the municipal building, he noticed that same dark sedan parked on the street. The windows were tinted, giving no clue who was inside. Jonathan's heart rate spiked. Summoning courage, he strode toward the car. But as he closed in, the driver started the engine and sped away, leaving Jonathan in a swirl of exhaust fumes. Who is following me? That night, he decided to call Leonard again. He shared his concerns about the sedan, about the suspicious LLC, about everything. He half expected Leonard to laugh it off, but this time, Leonard sounded tense. I'm telling you, John, there's a lot of unscrupulous players in real estate. Don't let them intimidate you. Maybe they found out you're sniffing around and they're worried you'll blow the whistle on something. Let me handle it. I'll call some connections, see if I can get a read on this Riverside Holdings. Relieved but still on edge, Jonathan hung up. He stepped outside the motel room to clear his head. Clouds loomed overhead, the night air thick with the scent of an impending storm. The flickering street lamp cast an eerie glow on the pavement, echoing the turmoil brewing in his mind. He couldn't help but think of how swiftly this trip had gone, from a nostalgic vacation to a deep dive into hidden pasts and potential threats. As he headed back inside, he resolved not to let fear stop him. He had to find Enrique again. If the man knew anything else, it was time to confront him directly. Because for all the philanthropic dreams Jonathan had for West Briarwood, they would mean nothing if they were funded by dirty money. I need to know the truth, he thought grimly, no matter how much it hurts. The storm broke that night with furious winds and pounding rain. Thunder shook the windows of Jonathan's motel room, mirroring the internal tempest that churned inside him. Sleep was fleeting. Every thunderclap jolted him awake, mind spinning with questions about his father, about Riverside Holdings, about the black sedan. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and Jonathan felt too restless to stay cooped up. He pulled on a hooded jacket and ventured out into the damp morning air. The streets glistened with puddles. He passed the old playground, seeing the swings sway emptily in the aftermath of the storm. He remembered how, as a kid, he'd sit on a swing after it rained, letting the water soak into his worn-out sneakers, dreaming of a better life. You got that better life, a voice in his mind whispered. But at what cost? He found himself returning to the park bench where he'd first encountered Enrique. Perhaps, he told himself, Enrique would show up again. Hours passed. People came and went, dog walkers, joggers, a few homeless individuals seeking shelter under the slide. No sign of the man with the cane. Just as he was about to leave, a soft voice called his name. He turned and recognized an older woman with gentle features. She introduced herself as Maria Alvarez. You're Jonathan Carter, right? The man who grew up here. Yes, Jonathan said, surprised. She glanced around nervously. Enrique told me you might be looking for him. He can't meet you here. Too risky. But he said you should go to 18 Mayfield Avenue at midnight tonight. Alone. Midnight? Jonathan repeated, unsettled. Why so late? Who is Enrique afraid of? Maria's eyes flickered with unease. He didn't say. He just told me to tell you not to trust everyone close to you. That some people knew all along about your father's arrangements. The news pressed like a weight on Jonathan's heart. Understood. Thank you, he managed. She nodded and hurried off, leaving him standing in the park as the drizzle turned to a light mist. Don't trust everyone close to me. The words echoed ominously. Could it be that Leonard knew more than he was letting on? Jonathan despised the idea of suspecting his friend and partner, but he couldn't deny the possibility. Leonard handles the finances, the lawyers, everything. Midnight came slowly that day, each hour feeling stretched by tension. Jonathan wrestled with whether to tell Mikey or someone else about his plan. He ultimately decided against it. If Enrique had specifically said to come alone, maybe it was for safety, both his own and that of anyone who might accompany him. With adrenaline surging, he set out at 11:30 p.m. in a rented sedan. The streets were mostly empty, the neon lights of a few convenience stores reflected in puddles on the asphalt. He arrived at 18 Mayfield Avenue, a vacant lot. The remains of a burnt-out building stood like a skeleton. Jonathan parked a short distance away, cutting the headlights. Heart pounding, he stepped into the darkness, the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes feeling deafening in the still night. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, leaning on a cane. "Enrique?" Jonathan whispered, stepping closer. "Yes," the older man's voice rasped. "You came." Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the sagging structure behind them. Enrique turned his gaze to Jonathan. "Your father wasn't just laundering money. He worked with organized crime. He had channels that extended far beyond West Briarwood. When he died, that money didn't vanish. It was slipped into certain real estate ventures, disguised as legitimate revenue." "I have paperwork," Enrique said, patting a folder under his arm. "Proof that a percentage of Carter and Finch's early profits traces back to these shell companies your father operated under. Riverside Holdings was one of them." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "That's impossible," he choked out. "I never saw anything suspicious. Leonard never mentioned." "Think, Jonathan. Did you ever question where all the capital came from? You were too busy hustling and building. Meanwhile, your father's partners used you as a front." A torrent of emotions roiled in Jonathan's chest. Fury, fear, betrayal. "Why are you telling me this now?" Enrique's face softened. "Because I'm dying, and before I go, I want the truth to be known. I was one of the men who helped arrange these deals. I saw you on the news, bragging about your business empire, and realized you had no clue. So here," he said, thrusting the folder at Jonathan, "look for yourself." Jonathan took the folder in trembling hands. "You said not to trust everyone. Are you implying Leonard Finch is deeply involved?" Enrique said. "He might act clueless, but he knew some deals had shady origins. I can't prove how much he knew, but I suspect quite a bit." Jonathan's mind spun, recalling the brand new accountants Leonard insisted on hiring. Had that been a strategy to obscure the money trail? He staggered backward, overwhelmed by this avalanche of revelations. In the distance, police sirens wailed, and Enrique's eyes darted nervously. "That's enough for now. I've told you what you need to know. Find the truth, or it'll consume you." Then he vanished into the darkness, leaving Jonathan clutching the folder like a cursed treasure he was terrified to open. Jonathan drove back to the motel like a man possessed, white-knuckling the steering wheel. In the folder sat copies of bank statements, shell company registrations, and an unsettling letter with his father's signature. He didn't dare read them yet. He feared losing focus on the road. Once safely in his room, he locked the door and sat on the bed, flipping on the small lamp. Rain tapped against the window, adding a dismal soundtrack to the most harrowing moment of his life. He spread out the documents on the bed, scanning them one by one. There it was, in black and white, Riverside Holdings, along with a handful of similarly named LLCs, transferring suspiciously large sums into accounts that ultimately merged with Carter and Finch's early investment pool. One set of notes alluded to TC's share with references to Thomas Carter. Another page contained a signature line, co-signed by none other than Leonard Finch, acknowledging receipt of funds for initial capitalization. How could I have missed this? Jonathan whispered, eyes burning. The transaction dates lined up with the exact time he and Leonard began flipping properties. Back when they had capital he naively assumed came from legitimate private investors. Leonard had sourced. Still, his head spun with questions. Did Leonard truly know the money was tainted? Or did he simply not ask too many questions? The fact that his father's name appeared directly on these documents left him feeling nauseous. Everything I've built, everything I've prided myself on, might be nothing but a facade. At one point, he threw the papers down, burying his face in his hands. He thought about the philanthropic projects he was planning here in West Briarwood. How meaningless they would become if the funding was illegal. People will say it's blood money, drug money, or worse. The idea alone was horrifying enough to break him. A text buzzed on his phone, making him jump. It was Leonard, asking, any updates? Found anything? The casual tone made Jonathan's stomach churn. For a moment, he considered confronting Leonard immediately, venting his rage through text. But he hesitated. Enrique's words, don't trust everyone close to you. Heart pounding, Jonathan typed back, not yet, just rumors. Thanks for checking on me. He spent the rest of the night trying to formulate a plan. If he took this information public, it would destroy Carter and Finch's reputation, possibly leading to criminal investigations. He'd likely lose everything. But if he kept it secret, he'd be living a lie supporting West Briarwood with money tainted by crime. Was there a middle ground? Could I rectify this quietly and distance myself from Leonard and the shady deals? No single scenario came to mind that didn't involve catastrophic fallout. Exhausted, he finally dozed off. The documents sprawled around him like ghosts of a past he'd never known. When morning arrived, Jonathan awoke to the piercing ring of his phone. He fumbled for it, heart jumping as he saw Mikey's number. Hello? John, you okay? I heard a rumor someone saw you sneaking around Mayfield Avenue last night. He rubbed his gritty eyes. Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to piece some things together. Look, man, if you're in trouble, legal trouble, financial trouble, let me help. I'm not rich, but I can hide you if need be, Mikey said, voice filled with genuine concern. Jonathan almost laughed at the absurdity. Me, a millionaire, needing to hide in West Briarwood? But the offer warmed him. Thanks, Mikey. You're a good friend. I just need time to sort some things out. He hung up and surveyed the tangle of papers again. If he was going to do the right thing, he needed more than just these documents from Enrique. He needed legal counsel, moral support, someone he could trust. But who? He thought of his mother, the woman who fled from Thomas Carter's shadow. She never talked about the specifics of his father's life, but maybe she knew something. Jonathan had avoided involving her in anything related to his father, but times had changed. After a quick shower and a hasty coffee, he gathered the incriminating documents. As he slipped them into a briefcase, a sense of grim determination settled in. I'm going to see Mum. She deserves to know, and I need her guidance. What he didn't realize was that the storm swirling around him was about to escalate, drawing in everyone he cared about in a high-stakes game that would leave no one unscathed. Jonathan found his mother, Linda Carter, living in a quiet retirement community on the outskirts of the city. Though she had always been a strong woman, the years had softened her once sharp gaze. She welcomed Jonathan into her tidy bungalow, her eyes lighting up with maternal warmth mixed with curiosity. Jonathan, this is a surprise, she said, inviting him into the living room. I thought you were off traveling for business. Jonathan forced a small smile. I took a detour to West Briarwood. Needed to check on a few things. They settled onto a cushioned sofa. The room was filled with sentimental keepsakes, a crocheted blanket, family photos, and an antique clock ticking softly in the corner. Jonathan felt the comforting embrace of home, but he also felt the weight of the folder resting on his lap. "Mom," he began carefully, "I need to talk to you about Dad." She stiffened at once. "What about him?" he explained, in as calm a voice as he could manage. The allegations about his father's illicit money being tied to Carter and Finch. He showed her the folder, pointing to the shell companies, the suspicious transactions. Her face grew pale as she flipped through the pages. "Lord have mercy," Linda whispered. "I always suspected your father was involved in things he shouldn't be, but I never imagined it would connect to you like this." Jonathan exhaled shakily. "I know. I'm trying to figure out if Dad's dealings set me up for success in a way that can't be undone. If the seed money for my company was dirty, everything I've accomplished is built on a lie." Linda's hands trembled. She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "Jonathan, your father, he had a talent for getting people to do his bidding. He made promises, claimed he was setting up a future for us, for you, but the deeper he sank, the more dangerous it became. That's why I left." She closed the folder gently. "I can't tell you exactly what happened behind the scenes. I only know that when he had money, it seemed to come too easily. I never knew the specifics, but it scared me." "I didn't want you growing up in that environment." Jonathan nodded. Hearing it confirmed by his mother made it all too real. "What do I do now?" She touched his arm softly. "I wish I had a simple answer. If you come forward, you risk everything: your livelihood, your reputation, possibly legal consequences. But if you hide it, you'll never find peace." Her words echoed the conflict already raging inside him. He swallowed hard. "I might try to approach this from a legal angle. Maybe strike a deal to return any tainted money or pay restitution somehow. But I need proof, and I need to know exactly who knew what." Linda closed her eyes, inhaling a calming breath. "Do what you must, but be careful. The men your father ran with, if they're still around, they won't like having their secrets exposed. They've hurt people for far less." A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. The dark sedan, the sense of being followed, Enrique's cryptic warnings, it all added up to a looming threat. But he couldn't let fear control him. "I have a responsibility here." Before leaving, he hugged his mother, whispering a promise that he would stay safe. She clung to him, as if trying to shield him from all the dangers she once escaped. As he pulled away, he saw her eyes brimming with worry. "Call me, Jonathan. Whatever happens, I'm here." He nodded, steeling himself for the battle ahead. "I will, Mum. I promise." Little did he know that even as he stepped out of her home, forces were already at work, rattled by his inquiries, threatened by the possibility of exposure, ready to do whatever it took to keep their secrets hidden. Later that evening, Jonathan braced himself and called Leonard Finch. He needed to hear Leonard's side of the story. The phone rang multiple times before a groggy voice answered. "John? It's late. Is everything all right?" Leonard asked. Jonathan paced the hotel room. "I know, but we need to talk, Leonard. Face to face. Where are you?" Leonard hesitated. "I'm actually headed to West Briarwood tomorrow. I have a meeting with some local officials about a potential new development project we might invest in." A surge of anger lanced through Jonathan. He's coming here to do more deals, all the while ignoring the possibility that our foundation is corrupt? Perfect. "Let's meet," Jonathan said curtly, ending the call without waiting for a response. The next day, they agreed to meet at a local diner off the highway, a neutral place, away from prying eyes. Leonard arrived in his sleek black SUV, stepping out wearing a tailored jacket far too refined for West Briarwood's dusty roads. He offered Jonathan a friendly wave that felt forced. Inside, they slid into a booth. A lone fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Leonard flashed his charismatic grin. "So, you said you had news." Jonathan set a manila folder on the table. I found documents, Leonard. They indicate that our earliest capital might have come from shell companies owned by my father. Companies involved in organized crime. Leonard's face darkened. He lifted his coffee cup, his hand unsteady. Where'd you get these? Jonathan's eyes narrowed. I have a source. Doesn't matter who. What matters is, are they true? Did you know about this? Leonard sighed deeply, rubbing his temple. Look, John, this business, especially at the start, it's never just black and white. We needed capital. Answer me, Jonathan demanded, slamming his palm on the table, drawing glances from other patrons. Leonard leaned in, voice hushed. Fine, yes, I suspected the money might not be entirely clean, but your father's associates came to me. They said you were his son, that you deserved a fair shot. They never explicitly said it was criminal money. I just connected the dots and didn't ask questions. Jonathan felt his stomach twist into knots. You used me as a pawn. You made me the face of an operation built on dirty money. Leonard pressed his lips together, eyes darting to the folder. I did it for us, John, to give us that edge. You know how many real estate startups fail because they can't secure capital? We got the break we needed, and we turned it into a legitimate empire. Don't you see, we took something shady and built something real. People have jobs because of us. Investments have grown. This place can be revitalized if we continue. Spare me the justifications, Jonathan spat. We've laundered money, haven't we? Unknowingly or not, we've broken the law. Leonard's expression hardened. Technically, yes, we might be in violation, but that was years ago. The statute of limitations might even be relevant here. Jonathan didn't let him finish. I can't keep quiet, Leonard. A flicker of panic crossed Leonard's face. Let's not be hasty. If you expose this, we'll both go down. Not just us, the entire staff, shareholders, maybe even innocent clients. You'll ruin yourself and others. Or we handle this quietly. We restructure some finances, hush up any leaks, and life goes on. People will still benefit from your philanthropy. Nobody gets hurt. Jonathan's heart thundered. He'd known Leonard for years, admired his ruthless efficiency, but seeing this side of him, coldly rationalizing illegal activity, hit Jonathan like a hammer. I didn't build my life on these ethics. I can't keep living a lie. Leonard's face twisted in frustration. Then do what you must. But if you go public, I won't protect you. You'll be alone in this. And believe me, you have more to lose than you think. Stunned and furious, Jonathan snatched up the folder and stood. I'll decide what's right. You stay out of my way. With that, he left the diner, ignoring Leonard's quiet calls to come back. The next move was his to make, and it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. Jonathan spent the next 48 hours in a whirlwind of anxiety and deliberation. Every time he picked up the phone to call an attorney, he froze. What if they turn me in? What if they collude with Leonard? He'd built his life around trusting experts, but now he felt as if every pillar might crumble under the truth. Mikey noticed Jonathan's distress. When they met up for coffee, Jonathan finally confided in him, revealing the gist of the illegal origins of his wealth, though he omitted certain details to protect Mikey from the full liability of knowing. Mikey's eyes widened, but he placed a steadying hand on Jonathan's arm. "John, you have to do the right thing," he urged. "You're a good man at heart. I've known you since we were kids. If your company's built on something dark, you can't just ignore it. But Leonard's right about one thing," Jonathan admitted quietly. "Exposing this might destroy everything. People's jobs, philanthropic projects. I don't want to be responsible for that kind of fallout." Mikey scoffed gently. "It's not your fault. If anything, the fault lies with whoever planted this dirty money in your business, Leonard, your father's associates. You'll find a way to soften the blow." Jonathan nodded, but he still felt paralyzed by the enormity of the situation. That night, a knock on his motel door startled him. He pressed his eye to the peephole and saw Enrique, drenched by a sudden downpour. Jonathan let him in quickly. The older man was pale, coughing violently. "I need to talk," Enrique wheezed. "They came after me. A couple of men in suits. Asked questions about you, about the documents. I barely escaped." Jonathan sat him down, offering a glass of water. "Who were they?" Enrique shook his head. "Could be your father's old associates, or maybe Leonard's people. Doesn't matter. They're spooked. They know you have the proof now." A surge of protective instinct overcame Jonathan. "Enrique, you need to go to the police. Maybe enter witness protection." Enrique grimaced. "I'm not going to the police. I have a history. They won't believe me, or worse, they'll lock me up for my old crimes. I came to warn you. You need to act fast, or they'll bury this story, and maybe bury us too." Fear crystallized in Jonathan's gut. "What do you suggest? Take the documents to a reputable journalist," Enrique said, breath ragged. "The kind who specializes in exposing corporate malfeasance. Your father's crimes might have overlapped with bigger syndicates. Once this is out in the open, it'll be harder for them to make you disappear quietly." Jonathan swallowed, recalling how terrifying it felt to be followed by that black sedan. He'd never considered going to the press. The thought of having his dirty laundry aired so publicly was mortifying. But perhaps it was the only path to both the truth and safety. Enrique placed a trembling hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Your father always said you'd be the golden child, the one who'd never have to get his hands dirty. Don't let them corrupt you now." Those words burned in Jonathan's heart, fueling a quiet resolve. "I won't let them silence me." A few hours later, after ensuring Enrique was settled in a safer location, Mikey's basement, Jonathan called an investigative reporter he'd once met at a charity gala, Marisol Lakewood, known for her fearless takedowns of high-profile criminals. He left a cryptic voicemail, refusing to divulge details over the phone, but hinting that he had evidence of massive corporate wrongdoing. He hung up, heart hammering against his ribs. If Marisol agreed to see him, there would be no turning back. The press would pick the story up like piranhas. Carter and Finch would be indicted in the court of public opinion, if not in an actual courtroom. But maybe that's the only way to break free from this twisted legacy, he thought. Shortly before dawn, his phone buzzed. A text from Marisol: "Meet me at the West End warehouse tomorrow, 11 p.m. No cameras, no entourage. I'll hear you out." Jonathan exhaled. The wheels of fate were now in motion, and he braced himself for the chain reaction about to be unleashed. The West End warehouse stood near the edge of a grim industrial district, its towering facade chipped and streaked from decades of exposure to the elements. Streetlights flickered, casting ominous halos across wet pavement. Jonathan parked his rental car in the shadows and stepped out into the cold night air. Clutched under his arm was a thick folder containing the damning evidence that could topple his entire empire. Marisol Lakewood waited near a side entrance. Dressed in dark, functional clothing, she offered a curt nod, her eyes watchful. "You came alone?" she asked, scanning the empty lot behind him. He nodded. "Yes, and you?" "I brought no crew," she confirmed. "Too dangerous. Given what you hinted at, let's talk inside." They slipped through a rusted steel door. The interior was cavernous and mostly empty, except for a few stray crates. The hum of distant machinery reverberated. Marisol set up a small lantern on a crate, illuminating the area with a ghostly glow. "All right," she said, flipping open a notepad. "Let's hear it." For nearly an hour, Jonathan outlined the tangled web of corruption, his father's involvement with organized crime, the hidden shell companies that seeded Carter and Finch's initial capital, Leonard Finch's complicity, and the threats that had shadowed him since he started digging. Periodically, Marisol interrupted with clarifying questions, her expression a mixture of disbelief and professional excitement. He handed her the folder, letting her thumb through the incriminating pages. "This is huge," she murmured, shining a small flashlight on one document detailing money transfers from Riverside Holdings. "If it checks out, it could be the story of the year, maybe the decade." Jonathan's chest felt tight. "I'm not trying to make headlines. I just want the truth out. And if there are legal consequences, I'll face them. But I need protection too." Marisol nodded gravely. "Your father's associates, the black sedan following you, these are serious threats. We can approach this carefully. Maybe have you interviewed on record under certain conditions. But once we publish, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" He closed his eyes, recalling the hopeful faces of West Briarwood neighbors who believed in his generosity. "I have to be. My entire life, my identity, it's all at stake." Marisol offered a rare, empathetic smile. "Good. Because your father's old partners won't hesitate to shut us down. We'll need to be smart. My editor will want to verify the documents independently and will need a statement from your partner, Leonard Finch. Are you prepared for that confrontation?" Jonathan took a steadying breath, thinking of the heated diner conversation. He'll deny it, or he'll try to spin it. But after we release these files, any lies he tells will unravel. Before Marisol could respond, the warehouse door slammed open with a metallic clang. In the faint light, Jonathan discerned the silhouettes of at least two men, one tall, broad-shouldered, the other short and stocky. They moved swiftly, guns drawn. "Hands up!" barked the taller man, voice echoing. Fear rocketed through Jonathan, and he raised his hands. Marisol did the same, dropping her flashlight, which rolled to cast wild shadows on the concrete floor. The men stalked closer, faces partially obscured by caps. "Give us the folder," the short one hissed, leveling his gun at Marisol. "Now." A cold sweat drenched Jonathan's back. He realized, with chilling clarity, that these must be the same individuals who went after Enrique. They followed me. Or they followed her. Marisol's eyes flicked to Jonathan, then to the folder lying on the crate. One of the men lunged forward, snatching it. "Listen," Jonathan said, voice shaking. "I don't know who sent you, but it's too late to cover this up. We have other copies." It was a bluff. He'd made only a single set, but he hoped they'd believe him. "Shut up!" The tall man snarled, jamming the muzzle of his gun against Jonathan's ribcage. "You meddle in things you shouldn't. You pay the price." Time seemed suspended. Jonathan's mind raced. Is this the end? The surreal calm that settled over him was broken only by the dull roar of blood in his ears. Suddenly, headlights flooded the warehouse from the open door behind the men. A car screeched to a halt. To Jonathan's amazement, Mikey burst through, brandishing a length of pipe. He swung wildly at the tall gunman, who stumbled back with a curse, the weapon firing a wayward shot that ricocheted off the concrete floor. The short man turned, startled. Marisol seized the moment, kicking his arm. His gun clattered away. Mikey followed up with another blow. Jonathan dove for the guns, kicking one out of reach. The tall man scrambled up, cursing, and sprinted toward the open warehouse door. The short man, clutching a bruised arm, staggered after him. They piled into the waiting car, engine roaring as they sped off into the night, leaving a swirl of dust and a reek of burnt rubber. Chest heaving, Jonathan looked at Mikey in astonishment. "You saved our lives." Mikey's face was flushed with adrenaline, eyes wild. "Enrique said you were meeting a reporter tonight." "I had a bad feeling. Drove over, saw those guys sneaking in, and decided I wasn't letting you face them alone." Marisol panted, retrieving the folder from the ground. A bullet hole pierced its corner, but the contents appeared intact. "We need to go. Now." They hurried out, discarding the guns at the scene, none of them wanting to risk being caught in possession of a firearm. Once in their cars, they sped away from the warehouse, hearts pounding. In the rearview mirror, Jonathan saw Marisol's car following, Mikey trailing close behind. He gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands, stunned at how close they'd come to death. There's no hiding from this now, he thought. The only way out is through. And so, with fear looming but resolve undiminished, Jonathan pressed the accelerator, bracing himself for the final collision course with the truth. The days that followed exploded into chaos and revelation. Marisol Lakewood published an explosive expose, armed with both Jonathan's testimony and Enrique's documents. Law enforcement agencies descended upon Carter and Finch, launching investigations that shook the financial world. Leonard Finch was taken into custody for questioning. He claimed ignorance, but the paper trail told another story. Thomas Carter's long-lost criminal ties came to light, tarnishing the pristine sheen of Jonathan's empire. Yet, amid the fallout, a different kind of redemption emerged. Jonathan cooperated fully, pled guilty to unwittingly harboring illegal funds, and vowed to use what remained of his assets to restore the neighborhood he once fled, this time with honest money. West Briarwood rallied behind him. Mikey became a local hero for his brave intervention, and Enrique, despite his failing health, lived to see justice served. Thank you for watching. If this story gripped you, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread it far and wide. Join us for more compelling real-life drama fiction that dares to explore hidden truths, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds that keep hope alive. Your support means the world together. Let's keep unearthing stories that remind us. Redemption is never out of reach.